Bonjour, Michel.
Salam alaikum, bonjour, greetings to you.
Merci. Merci. Thank you to have say yes to this interview, and we hope that you're going to have an enjoyable session. So, for our listeners, I would like you to introduce yourself, tell us what you are doing, and what is your impression of this symposium number 3.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah, my name is Michelle Small. I have 2 hats. My one hat is that I'm a lecturer in international relations at the University of the Witwatersrand. And I teach various topics relating to war, peace, conflict, elections on the continent. And my other hat is that I serve as an independent expert on the UN Working Group for Mercenaries, which is a special procedures mandate with the Office of the Commissioner of Human Rights based in Geneva.
Okay. So let's start with you spoke about mercenaries. So, Dr. Small, you have studied the growing role of private military and security companies in Africa. So, to what extent do those actors undermine the AU peace and security framework, and how can the continent regulate their presence effectively?
So our mandate looks at mercenaries, related actors. So these are often state-owned or state-aligned security and military entities, and then private military and security companies. And it's important to say that these are conceptually distinct actors, each with their own sort of prohibitions and regulations, which brings us to the second part of your question. Currently, when we look at private military and security companies, there is no universal regulation currently in place, or even continental regulations in place. What currently regulates their activities is completely voluntary through associations like the International Code of Conduct, ICOCA, or ISO, International Stabilizations Operations Association, as well as the Montreux document. There is an instrument being negotiated in Geneva. It's called the IGWG IPMSCs, the International Intergovernmental Working Group on Private Military and Security Companies. And then to come to the third part of your question, what's happening on the continent? So currently on the continent, we have the OAU Convention on Mercenaries, which is quite outdated, and it is currently being updated. And under that new draft, private military and security companies are being considered. And similar to the debates and arguments we were hearing in Geneva that these actors are all distinct and each needs their own legislation, we're encountering some of these problems on the continent when it comes to having one complete convention for different types of actors.
Okay. So moving to the human rights, in conflict zones like the Sahel, DRC, and Mozambique, civilians often bear the burden of violence involving foreign military contractors. What accountability mechanisms are needed to ensure that human rights violations linked to the mercenary operation are addressed transparently?
So it's really a levels of analysis answer here. You cannot have accountability, you cannot have justice if you don't have the legislation in place in which to regulate, prohibit, legislate these actors. So, and this is currently what's at play. You have the UN Convention on Mercenaries, which looks at one type of actor. The instrument that I spoke about, the IGWG and PMSCs, which is again trying to establish regulation on another actor. And then the OU, which is trying to revise its convention and look at separate actors. So that's the one level. The second level is that nationally, all states are obliged in their own domestic regulation to make these distinctions on what should be prohibited and what should be regulated. What is a core state function? And what sort of services and activities can private companies perform? And then specifying even within those regulations, the training requirements, the registration requirements, management of weapons, if that's allowed. And importantly, what is missing in a lot of contexts are oversight and monitoring mechanisms. So it's not just that you have the legislation about private military and security companies, but you need an entity that monitors their activities in an ongoing way and reports on these activities in an ongoing way, and requires companies to have operational grievance mechanisms. So if a violation or an abuse does be committed, you can have victims who can seek resources and recourse through these different instruments and mechanisms. But in the absence of specifying this in your domestic law, it means that contractors and companies will continue to operate without any sort of proviso on their behavior.
But also, what affect our sovereignties? I believe so.
Sorry?
So what affect the sovereignty of the state of Africa?
So, yeah, I mean, these different actors are used in different ways, and some of which can undermine constitutional orders, can contribute to unconstitutional changes of government. But actually, we're seeing a shift whereby a lot of mercenary-related actors in government-to-government contracting are being sent to engage in coup-proofing services, regime protection services, and in this way, it impedes the right to self-determination, right? You're upholding an elite that has gained power through unconstitutional means and preventing citizens through the use of these security and military entities who engage in not only protecting elites, but things like detention, arrest, the cordoning off of resource-rich areas to ensure the continued business operation when it comes to resource production. And citizens don't see the benefit of this.
So do you believe such intervention represent a form of modern imperialism? And after we want to find out, how can Africa assert sovereignty over its own security agenda?
I'm a little averse to getting into using labels of imperialism. Instead, what I wish to really highlight is when injustices are committed or when impunity exists. And I come back to the point about if you do not have the legal frameworks, then there is potential for sovereignty to be undermined. There is potential for human rights abuses to occur. With no recourse and access to remedy injustice because it hasn't been spelled out in the legal framework. So when it comes to states reclaiming the sovereignty that you're speaking about, reclaiming the security that you're speaking about, there needs to be very specific commitments about what is the preserve of our national police, what is the preserve of our national army, and what sort of functions can we outsource because we don't have the technical capacity or we don't have the equipment. But when you do that, you need to have very clear regulations in place about what happens when a violation or abuse is committed. And is it against the individual? Is it against the company? Or is it the state that is responsible for the violations that are committed? So there is a lot that needs to happen within a state that is institutional and institution building, which is part of sovereignty.
Yeah. So speaking about policy, so I would like to find out what policy or legal framework would you recommend the African Union to adopt to protect human rights while regulating or limiting mercenary involvement in internal conflict? First question. And to close, how might this align with international law and the UN's existing mechanism?
So in this regard, the OAU Convention is being redrafted. And in the first draft, is now a second draft in this process. But in the first draft, what moved the process along, and it's something that I made in my comments today, that justice and remedy should not only be about sovereign rights, they should be about human rights. And in this new draft, it is imagining a commission where violations and abuses can be reported and documented and justice sought, but also oversight mechanisms. And I think that is the important part in regulation, is that it's pointless to have legislation which will lie dormant unless someone is watching about its implementation, its operationalization, and accountability mechanisms under that legislation. So I'm very pleased to see that our continent is thinking forward. It's not only what is outdated, but what do we need to think forward for future generations to ensure justice by applying certain provisos on companies in terms of human rights reporting, in terms of state reporting in the new draft.